10 Shadows, or Tokusa no Kage Bojutsu, is a name that literally translates to 10 shadow arts. This is based on the technique having a total of 10 different Shikigami that Megumi can summon using shadows as an intermediary, Shikigami that he has to tame through rituals and direct combat. The 10 Shadows technique was the very first curse technique ever shown in Jujutsu Kaisen, appearing in episode 1, and gave viewers of the series the first real taste of what Jujutsu can do. Up until this point, nobody had any idea what curse techniques were, and Megumi's first time using it was something to be excited about, given how new it was. However, this was only the very beginning of what the 10 Shadows could do, as Megumi was far from tapping into its full potential. 10 Shadows dates all the way back to the Heian era, the golden era of Jujutsu sorcery, where Sukuna was an unstoppable force of nature. This was said to be the most vicious era in Jujutsu Kaisen's history, as both curses and curse users were far more bloodthirsty than they are today. This would eventually give rise to 3 prominent sorcerers from the Heian era that turned into cursed spirits after their death, and would later be known as the 3 great vengeful spirits, who even to this day have a strong reputation 1,000 years after their deaths. Each of the 3 big vengeful spirits started their own family lines before dying as humans, which would later become known as the Big 3 families: the Zenin clan, the Kamo clan, and the Gojo clan, where their techniques would be passed down respectively over generations, while those who had them were regarded as higher status than those around them due to their potential, with information gained on the technique from each of its users being passed down over the years to make the next generation that uses the inherited technique stronger than the last. The 10 Shadows being the inherited technique of the Zenin clan, one of the most ruthless clans in the series, was something that they valued so much that even though they were willing to kill Maki for not having any cursed energy or a curse technique, they were willing to resort to human trafficking to keep Megumi and his curse technique inside of the Zenin clan, as Naobito was willing to buy him from his father Toji Fushiguro, who defected from the clan at a young age. 10 Shadows is a technique that has its roots in Japanese legend through the 10 Shinto treasures, sacred tools used in Shinto rituals in the past called Mitamashizumi no Mino Matsuri, where each clan member would perform their rites at one of 3 shrines: the Isonokami Shrine, the Yahiko Shrine, and the Mononobe Shrine. The 10 treasures themselves are pictured on several of the 10 Shadow Shikigami's bodies, with the legend surrounding the treasures being that when they're all used together, they can heal any illness and even bring the dead back to life. This brings about several different theories about what Megumi's full potential may be when looking at how the Shikigami work, where once they die, they're fused together to create a version of themselves that's stronger than their individual parts. Many have theorized that once all the 10 Shadow Shikigami are destroyed, they'll create an ultimate Shikigami from the 10 Shadows, which will have all these properties of raising the dead and curing all illnesses, although this hasn't been confirmed in the story. The 10 Shadows works by using hand signs to summon an array of 10 different Shikigami. Once a user of the technique gains the 10 Shadows, typically around age 6 or 7, they'll start off with 2 Divine Dogs, Divine Dog Black and Divine Dog White. Once the user becomes strong enough to fight with their divine dogs and wants to gain more strength, obtaining the rest of the 10 Shadow Shikigami becomes one of the main priorities. The rest of the Shikigami, unlike the divine dogs, have to be tamed via a ritual, where the user of the technique has to fight and tame their new Shikigami before they can summon them on command. No one can help the 10 Shadows user tame the Shikigami, or else the ritual becomes void. Having another person join in on the ritual is typically something that's done to avoid death on the summoner's part, although it is possible that someone without curse energy may be able to join these rituals to bypass this rule, since many binding vows, barriers, and other elements of Jujutsu Kaisen don't apply to those that have absolutely 0 cursed energy. The 10 Shadows can only be obtained in one of 2 ways, one of which is far more rare than the other. The first and primary way of obtaining 10 Shadows is to be born in the Zenin family, the ones who passed the technique down in the first place. Being a member of the Zenin clan does not guarantee that you'll get the 10 Shadows at birth, and inherited techniques often skip multiple generations until someone is born with them, which is one of the main reasons why those who have the technique are so coveted in the first place. The technique can't be stolen or transferred to another person at will, and is solely in the hands of the user until their death. The only exception as of right now being through the process of becoming a vessel, where someone who can live inside of another person's body, like Kenjaku or Sukuna, can transfer their souls into another person and take over their body. and by extension, gain access to their curse technique. The 10 Shadows has many advantages, some of which were pointed out by Sukuna himself when he saw the technique for the first time, where even when Megumi, who was a grade 2 sorcerer, which at best means he would have been roughly equal to a grade 1 cursed spirit at the time, ran into a special grade, Sukuna saw no reason why with a technique like the 10 Shadows, that Megumi shouldn't have absolute confidence when facing a finger bearer, one of the special grade cursed spirits in the series. One of these advantages being that 10 Shadows is far more practical than the regular way of summoning Shikigami, which most people can do, but on a level that's far less effective than with an inherited technique, with the Shikigami themselves being able to adapt to a situation in the moment, rather than serving a single purpose, something that's helped Megumi in several of his fights, as one of his most used Shikigami, Nue, frequently comes in to save him when he's in danger. One of the disadvantages of any Shikigami-based technique are that the users are often weaker than others when it comes to physical strength and hand-to-hand combat. This is shown many times throughout the series where Megumi gets pushed to his limits far faster than brawler-style characters like Yuji, for example. This is a weakness that both Megumi and Suguru, someone with a very similar technique, cover by becoming more skilled at close-range combat, which they even use their summonings in the middle of to make their skills more effective. However, if a user of the 10 Shadows is damaged too heavily, their Shikigami will despawn and return to the shadows that they were made from, leaving the summoner helpless when they're pushed to their limit, excluding a few last resorts. The Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook describes the 10 Shadows technique as the following. 10 Shadows, Tokusa no Kage Bojutsu, an inherited technique of the Zenin family that uses shadows as a medium in order to summon Shikigami with various prearranged abilities. In total, there are 10 kinds of Shikigami, but the first Shikigami granted are Divine Dogs White and Black. The first Shikigami, Divine Dogs, are very convenient and possess high agility as well as excellent sensing and searching abilities. For the others, the sorcerer must perform an exorcism ritual in order to subdue the Shikigami. Once a Shikigami is subdued, it can be summoned at will. If a Shikigami is completely destroyed, it can't be summoned again, but the techniques and powers left behind by the destroyed Shikigami will be passed on to the others. This is interesting because it not only goes over the concept of inheritance and rituals behind taming the Shikigami, but also points out that the summonings of the 10 Shadows retain their animalistic qualities, like the Divine Dogs, who are based on wolves, having an excellent sense of smell, and using that for tracking the way that wolves would in real life, something that gets explored much more in depth later on. What the 10 Shadows essentially is the equivalent of someone making hand puppets and summoning a lethal monster that can murder their enemies because of it, which get even stronger when they die, as long as a Shikigami that's compatible with the one that's been destroyed was already tamed. Both Sukuna and Gojo, two of the strongest characters in the series, and possibly some of the strongest of all time, even go out of their way to praise the potential of 10 Shadows, despite the technique being in its infancy when doing so, with Gojo saying that at his peak, Megumi would be even stronger than he is, as a fight between someone with both the Limitless and the Six Eyes versus a user of the 10 Shadows already happened hundreds of years ago, where both people ended up dead. Sukuna even taking an interest in the technique himself, despite having only seen a fraction of what it can do, calling Megumi's lack of faith in his own abilities a wasted treasure. This wasn't only foreshadowing of Megumi's potential and the potential of the 10 Shadows, but foreshadowing of the events in the story as a whole, as Megumi would become the only living person that Sukuna wanted to keep alive, as he had his own plans for Megumi and his curse technique. This would lead to Sukuna going out of his way to keep an eye on Megumi throughout the story, and even cause Kenjaku and the Disaster Curses to tread carefully around Megumi when they see him, as Kenjaku was completely aware that killing Megumi would act as a landmine for Sukuna, who would not only destroy everyone at Jujutsu High, but Kenjaku and the Disaster Curses as well. Megumi would later go on to be broken down mentally, piece by the tragic events that continued to happen to him, namely surrounding his sister, Tsumiki. And when his spirit was finally broken, Sukuna force-fed Megumi his fingers, as Megumi already had the potential to become a vessel, but would need to be mentally broken first for Sukuna to have control, giving Sukuna both a body that he can move in more freely than he could with Yuji, and the 10 Shadows curse technique that already had the potential to kill someone on Gojo's level, on top of his own curse techniques that he already had to begin with, making Megumi's curse technique one of the most important in the entire series, as it's not only the first one that viewers of the anime were ever introduced to, it's also shaping up to be one of the most lethal techniques that will ever be seen when used in the hands of the most ruthless and powerful antagonists that the series has. 10 Shadows, as the name implies, uses shadows to summon Shikigami that Megumi can use to attack his enemies and put to use for a variety of other purposes. As you probably guessed, the visual summoning of the 10 Shadow Shikigami are based on hand signs that take their roots in shadow puppet theater, an art of storytelling that dates all the way back to the Han Dynasty in China between 140 and 87 BCE. This gives you an idea of the hand signs that Megumi uses to create the 10 Shadow Shikigami, as the hand signs that he uses are often meant to represent the one needed to create the shadow of the animal itself. Examples being the Divine Dogs, which creates a wolf shadow, Nue, which creates a bird shadow, and Max Elephant, which does the same thing. The 10 Shadow Shikigami have made several different appearances throughout the series, with Megumi summoning both of his Divine Dogs, Nue, Max Elephant, his Toad Shikigami, Orochi, a Snake Shikigami, and his Rabbit Shikigami. As you may have noticed, that isn't 10, because Megumi still has other Shikigami to unlock before he has all of them. So even at this point, the 10 Shadows still hasn't shown everything that it has to offer. All the Shikigami other than Megumi's Divine Dogs that he has control over had to be tamed at some point through a summoning ritual, where he defeated them individually and can now summon them at will. Based on the fact that he's had the technique since he was 7 and is now around 15 years old, the fact that he hasn't tamed the other Shikigami in the last 8 years should speak to their strength. So whatever the remaining Shikigami are, they should be impressive to say the least. If you want to know more about how strong Megumi is, I do have a video on that as well. The Shikigami of the 10 Shadows are typically based on animals and retain their animal qualities. For example, the Divine Dogs being able to track down opponents with their sense of smell, Nue being able to attack enemies from above due to its ability to fly, and even uses its wings to assist or even transport Megumi at different points in time. Max Elephant having weight that's comparable to a real elephant that Megumi can use to crush his enemies, and the rest of the Shikigami having animal-based qualities as well. Qualities that get amplified by Megumi's domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. Each of the Shikigami have their own inherent abilities, some of which can be identified at a glance, and some which need a bit more observation. Nue, Megumi's bird Shikigami, uses electricity-based attacks to shock its opponents. Max Elephant shoots out torrents of water that are strong enough to destroy the walls inside of buildings to either drown or force enemies out of their positions. Nue and Max Elephant can even combine their attacks to mix water with electricity, making the electric shock that Nue uses even more effective. Rabbit Escape summons hundreds and possibly thousands of rabbit Shikigami to take up so much space that its enemy can't see the caster, allowing for them to move undetected while the Shikigami are alive. Megumi's Frog Shikigami typically catch projectiles moving towards Megumi, or restrain weaker enemies with their tongues. The Divine Dogs typically get used for tracking down and slashing apart opponents with their claws. And Orochi, a snake summoned Shikigami, can extend to lengths that far exceed that of its real-world counterpart, trapping its enemies in its jaws in the process, giving the 10 Shadows many different ways of combining each Shikigami's different strengths to trap and overwhelm its opponents. One of the main advantages of the 10 Shadow Shikigami is combining the powers of individual Shikigami to make one that has completely different advantages than they would separately. One way of doing this is by combining two compatible Shikigami through the 10 Shadows extension technique to create combinations like the Well of the Unknown Abyss that combines Nue, a bird Shikigami, with his frogs. The concept of power inheritance through death is a completely different aspect of the 10 Shadows entirely, where unlike the Well of the Unknown Abyss, when the individual Shikigami are killed, they're gone for good. Their power is then inherited by a Shikigami that's compatible with them, like Divine Dog Black and Divine Dog White, to create a new Shikigami that's far stronger than the original two ever were. Megumi's Divine Dog White couldn't even keep up with a Finger Bear, one of the weakest special grade curses in the series. Yet once it fused through death with Divine Dog Totality, it became strong enough to keep up with and rip through Hanami, a special grade disaster curse that could outmatch several Tokyo and Kyoto students with no effort. Megumi also uses the Shikigami that he summons to fake out his enemies, by having them be unsummoned as soon as his enemies notice them, giving him a distraction long enough to either attack them or to make other plans. One of the biggest drawbacks of summoning Shikigami is the curse energy cost associated with the summoning. The stronger the Shikigami, the more the curse energy cost will be. This is best demonstrated in the Kyoto Exchange event, and the culling games, where Megumi goes from only having enough curse energy to summon Max Elephant once a day, to summoning it several different times during the culling games, along with summoning other powerful Shikigami and using his domain expansion. So while this does start as an issue that can hold the technique back in the beginning, it becomes less of a problem with the growth of the person using it. The other drawback of the 10 shadows being that not only do the Shikigami get desummoned when the user takes too much damage, but they're also not hard to kill in their base forms. Take Orochi being one-shot by Sukuna flexing his muscles at 15% of his strength, or Nue being stabbed through the chest by Hanami, who wasn't even taking Megumi serious. Divine Dog Totality is the strongest out of Megumi's tamed Shikigami so far, and can go toe-to-toe with special grade curses, but the ones who haven't evolved into their more powerful inherited forms aren't competing at that level. Megumi essentially has his bases covered when it comes to awareness as long as his Shikigami are around. Nue can catch anything coming at him from above, Divine Dog Totality can track any threats on the ground, and both his Rabbit Escape and Max Elephant provide different levels of utility that Megumi can use to secure his own safety. 10 Shadows has other abilities, like being able to store weapons inside of shadows, and even being able to go inside of the shadows of others, and the ones created by its user, to avoid attacks and to sneak up on their enemies. Next is the 8-handled sword divergent Scylla divine general I'm not saying all that shit. The top Shikigami of the 10 shadows that no one has been able to beat in 1,000 years. That took Sukuna himself, the king of all curses, to beat, who Megumi, even after knowing Gojo since he was 7 years old, thinks can beat him in a one-on-one fight. Mahoraga's name is Makora in Japanese, with Mahoraga being an interchangeable translation. Makora is one of the 12 divine generals who protect the Buddha of healing and medicine in Mahayana Buddhism. The Scylla could mean several different things, one of which could be a reference to Buddhism with the 8-folded path and its 3 stages: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Or it can mean to guard against or a boundary in ancient Chinese. Divergent meaning odd, curious, strange, or different, with the 8-handled sword also being known as the 8 hands long sword, or Yatsuka no Tsurugi, one of the 10 sacred treasures given by a Shinto god. Another reference to the 10 sacred treasures that are pictured on the rest of the 10 shadow Shikigami, that Sukuna even calls out when he sees Mahoraga for the first time, with Megumi even referencing the 10 sacred treasures themselves when summoning Mahoraga with the chant that he does before the summoning is complete, making the many theories about the ultimate potential of the 10 shadows that much more interesting. Mahoraga was almost summoned several different times, starting all the way back in chapter 9, but made its first appearance in chapter 117, giving this one Shikigami more build-up than almost any character in the series, with almost 2 years from the time that it was first mentioned to the time that it was actually summoned by Megumi. One of the biggest reasons behind this is that summoning Mahoraga is usually a death sentence, as Mahoraga has never been exorcised by a single 10 Shadows user in 1,000 years. So whenever he gets summoned, the expectation is that he'll kill both Megumi and his opponent and anyone that's around them. While Megumi did come close to summoning Mahoraga several different times, it wasn't until he was near death in Shibuya that he finally summoned the full thing. Mahoraga, as mentioned before, is one of the strongest Shikigami ever shown in the series, who for 1,000 years straight never got exorcised a single time, including the man that beat someone with the exact same curse technique and 6 eyes as Gojo. Mahoraga isn't only strong enough to keep up with Sukuna at 15 fingers, who was too strong for Jogo, but he can also one-shot cursed spirits with the Sword of Extermination. The Sword of Extermination wraps itself in positive energy to take down cursed spirits in one hit. Even someone on Sukuna's level, who even when blocking, says that had he been a cursed spirit, he would have been done for after one attack. It can also adapt to any attack that it gets hit by after the wheel on its back spins, and regenerate from any damage done by those same kinds of attacks before adapting to something else. For example, if it gets hit by Sukuna's curse technique, Dismantle or Cleave, that cuts its enemies, it'll adapt to all slashing techniques and be unkillable by slashing techniques until it's hit by something completely different. This is why after using his domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine, Sukuna had to vaporize Mahoraga with a flame curse technique to get rid of it for good. This not only makes Mahoraga incredibly strong, but would also make whoever tames him one of the most dangerous people alive, as having control over something on Mahoraga's level, on top of being strong enough to beat it in the first place, would make the person using using the 10 shadows almost unstoppable compared to the rest of the series. The same ritual applies for Mahoraga as the rest of the Shikigami in the 10 shadows. Mahoraga has to be beaten by the person that summoned him in the first place, otherwise the ritual is null and void. This is why after Megumi summoned Mahoraga in Shibuya and Sukuna killed it as an outsider, Megumi didn't gain control over the Shikigami for himself. Although now that Sukuna has control over Megumi's body, Mahoraga may be controlled for the first time in history, not only making Sukuna one of the strongest of all time, but also giving him one of the strongest Shikigami of all time as well, making one of the most dangerous villains that Jujutsu Kaisen has ever seen, and solidifying what the true potential of the 10 shadows was actually meant to be.